Hello. Welcome to my tier ranking list for Final Fantasy XIV. In this video, we are going to be putting the jobs together in ranks, fighting game style. While this list truly is my opinion of how the jobs should be ranked, it is my opinion and shouldn't be taken as the gospel. I'm always up for discussion in the comments section as I enjoy debating these kinds of things. Finally, 14 is not a fighting game and this kind of ranking isn't perfect. However, I think this is good fun to have anyway. There is no truly utterly weak job in this game and all of them can clear content. The balance right now is probably better than it ever has been in this game's history. But some jobs do have clear weaknesses or strengths that make them less or more desirable in a party, and I just want to elaborate on these things. While it is late in the expansion, I think there's no better time than to talk about this, since all jobs have received their final buffs. Now that we've talked about everything, let's dive into this list. Now we've reached A tier, and this is where we start to reach the jobs that are very strong and tend to creep into the meta, if not already have their own meta comps. Starting off we have Red Mage, or as many call it, Prog Mage. Red Mage is the undisputed best race caster in the game. Because of its trade, dual cast, Red Mage has the ability to instantly cast any spell after hard casting any spell. This means that a Red Mage could raise 3 people in a rapid 6 GCDs. While this generally isn't a situation you'd find yourself in, Red Mage definitely has the advantage of easing the healer's MP by handling raises in an encounter. The ease of raising with a Red Mage is very valuable as only one other DPS is capable of raising. Another advantage that Red Mage always brings is its general ease of use. The rotation of a Red Mage is one that is not too particularly hard and is very straightforward. Being the accepted Prog Mage that it is, having a job that allows you to deal your damage while you can focus more on mechanics is very useful. And don't forget that the damage output of Red Mage is nothing to scoff at. Red Mage is capable of outputting damage close to machinist damage. It has an excellent solid rotation that generally isn't hurt too much by mechanics or downtime. Its AoE damage is very good with proper preparation, using a combination of Melee, Counter 6th, and Scatter to reach very high numbers. Melee is also just a very interesting take on an AoE move, trading high potency for a very fast GCD. An excellent move to have when you want to dispatch something quickly compared to something like the Black Mage's Flare. Speaking of Flare, Red Mages have some incredibly high potency moves. Their Flare and their Holy are both 600 potency moves that do ridiculously high damage. Its melee combo is rapid and high damaging, giving you a nice burst window that you get quite often. Red Mage also has Flesh and Counter 6th, 2 OGCD skills that are also very powerful and are on extremely low cooldowns. Red Mage does a great job of constantly engaging you and keeping you satisfied. Red Mage has a considerable amount of mobility for a caster. While it's not quite too great at constant movement, it is great at repositioning. You generally won't be slide casting much on Red Mage since every other GCD is an instant cast. It also has total E3 movement during its melee combo, which is something to consider in terms of movement. You also have Core and Displacement that are a gap closer and backstep respectively, and a key part of your damage rotation. While Red Mage is a proc-based class, its procs are very frequent and manipulatable. And even if the procs don't come out, the potency difference and rotational change isn't so harsh that it will leave you unsatisfied. All these factors make Red Mage a valuable job in the early release of most content. While Red Mage doesn't have any particular flaws, its biggest con is that, after the progging period Red Mage tends to become quite weak. Its staple raises are no longer needed, becoming a wasted utility. Not only that, but you could argue that if your group is very competent, the raise of the summoner will be more than enough for your group, which can hurt the Red Mage's value depending on how you look at it. Red Mage does also bring Embolden, a 10% damage buff for physical damage dealers and itself that lasts 20 seconds. But there's a catch to this incredibly stupid buff. It has a fall off effect that decreases its damage buff by 2% over that 20-second duration. While it's not as bad as it sounds, working around Embolden's foolish fall off is rarely heard of, and when used normally, most greedy bastard Red Mages will use it only to benefit themselves. Red Mages are simply A tier because they start off incredibly strong at the beginning of a tier, but lose effectiveness hard and will never be brought to a true optimized setting. As a prop mage however, it is a loving gift from Yoshi P. We arrive at Summoner, my personal favorite caster. While Summoner is visually shown as the middle of A tier, don't get it twisted honey. It easily shares the top spot with Monk in A tier. In fact, in most of Stormblood and even still currently, it was among the meta jobs of 14. The only reason I put the Summoner job stone behind Monk is because Monk technically has a higher damaging comp, but that comp has flaws of its own to deal with. Summoner is an extremely strong job that focuses on managing buffs and debuffs and controlling a pet. These pets are extremely good boys, and depending on your composition or how you're feeling that day truthfully, Summoner is a very flexible DPS that can fit anywhere it needs to be. Looking at Summoner's single target DPS, it struts just ahead of Monk in most cases. However, a good Monk can compete with a Summoner and occasionally beat it. It's just not very common to see a Monk win that battle. Think of it as Summoner wins 3 out of 4 battles. Based on this, Summoner's personal damage is extremely high and is the 3rd highest in the game. It has many party buffs it can bring to the table. From Garuda you have Contagion. Being a literal magic trick attack that lasts 15 seconds and a 10% magic damage vulnerability up, is Summoner's currently most valuable skill and can lead to some nasty burst for its magical brethren. Even with only healers in the party, it is still a very powerful skill to consider using. It also just feels really damn good to use when your Festers, Death Flares, and Orc Mourns follow up behind it. From Ifrit, you have Radiant Shield, an AoE buff that when is struck by any source of damage will apply a 5-second 2% physical damage debuff on the target. This AoE buff can last for about 20 seconds. It's a small buff, but still appreciated. Titan does exist but is currently quite useless. He's still a very good boy. And then your final pet, the goodest boy you can currently have, Demi Bahamut. Yes, a miniature version of the Calamity himself. He is a huge source of damage and leads to quite ridiculous burst windows and also cast Orc Mourn, but can only be summoned for 20 seconds at a time. This leads on to the absolutely ridiculous AoE potential of Summoner. The only job that can even rival Summoner in an AoE contest is the Black Mage. With its absolutely mental choices of AoE, it can clear out a group of adds by itself if it wanted to. In fact, it was so ridiculous that they nerfed it already and it's still ridiculously broken. Its single target is no joke at all either. At face value, Summoner's potencies are absolutely underwhelming, and its rotation seeming completely boring. You stupid fool. Stop reading a book by its cover. While Ruin 2, 3, and 4 have some quite low potencies, those are not the damage skills you should be looking at to begin with. Summoner's dots, Bio 3 and Miasma 3, are extremely powerful dots that tick for serious damage, and with the help of Tri-Disaster, you generally don't have to cast them with proper buff management and have the bonus of gaining the Ruination buff, a 15 potency add-on to all Ruin skills. You have Fester, a 300 potency Ether Float skill, usable up to 3 times per Ether Flow. Don't count this skill out as it can still achieve some very high damage numbers under the multiple buffs it lines up with. After using all your Festers, you enter your Dreadwind trance phase. You gain 10% magic damage up in this stance. The cooldown of Tri-Disaster is reset, Ruin 3 is made instant cast, and you gain the access to Death Flare. At 400 potency, Death Flare is one of the heavier hitting skills in your arsenal, especially since it is always in the buff window of Dreadwind Trance. After 2 Dreadwind Trance phases you unlock Summon Bahamut. You summon Bahamut and the goal is to use as many skills as possible in his window to proc Wind Wave, a 180 potency ability that Bahamut cast every time you cast any ability or spell on a target. He also uses the aforementioned Orc Mourn, a toe curling, 680 potency skill that, like Death Flare, hits in an AoE. However, Bahamut is a pet so his potency scale slightly lower than yours, so do keep that in mind. This doesn't mean that the burst phase isn't absolutely destructive and very satisfying to use. The others also do a decent amount of damage and with their Enkindle abilities, They can hit quite hard as well. As you can see, Summoner has a lot more going on than what you might believe if it took it at face value. It is damage with many sources in small numbers, with an explosive finish every now and then. The Summoner is an absolute powerhouse that has all of its bases covered. It's extremely flexible and has no bad matchup with any party or fight. The only truly underwhelming skill Summoner has is Devotion, a 5% attack and healing potency buff, that also reduces damage taken by 5%, all for 20 seconds. It's not a bad skill, but it's nothing special either. Summoner's only true flaw is that the pet system can be a little wonky at times, but not very often. Also Bahamut has an issue with wanting to follow you around the map, like a lost puppy. This can lead to delayed wind waves and even a lost orc mourn, which is very annoying. It only remains in A tier because the S tier jobs are undisputed kings and are absolutely wanted by everyone. Not every job cares for Summoner because there are stronger buffs that you could generally receive in its place, and it tends to be in the replaceable slot by other jobs like Black Mage. If you really wanted to, you could even replace Summoner with a Machinist. Summoner is also replaceable with Monk in a triple melee comp. Summoner is very strong and highly valuable, but it is just barely replaceable, and it is my reason for leaving it in the highest of A tier. Sharing the highest spot with Summoner in A tier, we have Monk. Monk had a disappointing start at the beginning of Stormblood, not really bringing too many new things to the job with Tackle Mastery and Brotherhood, and taking some things away like Touch of Death. Monk has always had a very solid and flexible design that has always made it fun to play. But SE really stayed with the same formula, which began to make Monk seem stale. It wasn't weak, but it wasn't too strong either, and perhaps would have been a B tier class if it wasn't for the best buff that Monk ever received. Patch 4.2 introduced a lot of changes to many jobs, but Monk probably had the largest changes made to it. Riddle of Wind was made to refresh a Greased Lightning stack, and Perfect Balance was reduced to an incredible 60 seconds from its previous 180 seconds. Yes, this made Monk seem less threatening, but what it created was a powerful new rotation that the community began to find out about. This rotation was the Tornado Kick rotation. This rotation brought Monk back in the game with something fresh and allowed us to use the powerful Tornado Kick move we always wanted to use. Monk was now a powerhouse, a force to be reckoned with. Monk's playstyle includes a rapid GCD, buff stacking, and positional focused rotation that leads to devastating burst and extremely high critical hit rates. To get into Monk's kit, we have to go into the multiple mechanics of the job. First, Monk does not have any combos at all. What it has is stances that are activated by using certain weapon skills. This rotation brought Monk back in the game with something fresh and allowed us to use the powerful Tornado Kick move we always wanted to use. Monk was now a powerhouse, a force to be reckoned with. Monk's playstyle includes a rapid GCD, buff stacking, and positional focused rotation that leads to devastating burst and extremely high critical hit rates. To get into Monk's kit, we have to go into the multiple mechanics of the job. First, Monk does not have any combos at all. What it has is stances that are activated by using certain weapon skills. There are 3 stances: Raptor, Oppo Oppo, and Cowral stance. Each stance activates a multitude of weapon skills, and it is up to you to choose which weapon skills in between each stance that you want to use. This can also be manipulated by the skill form shift, allowing you to switch into any stance you want at the cost of 1 GCD. Every Cowral stance ability allows you its special properties and the granting of Greased Lightning. Greased Lightning is a stackable damage and skill speed buff that is a core mechanic of Monk. It is absolutely important to keep this damage buff at the maximum stack value as consistently as possible, and without it, Monk hits like a wet noodle. In the past, this was harder to do, as Greased Lightning had a shorter timer and not as many tools to keep it constantly rolling. In Stormblood, Monk has many tools to keep this buff active. You have the previously mentioned form shift that can move it into Cowral stance when the boss is not targetable, allowing you to refresh Greased Lightning instantly upon return, or apply one stack immediately. It no longer has its issues with getting up anymore to reach Greased Lightning 3. and with its Viagra prescription refilled, it has many tools to reach all 3 stacks in around 4 GCDs or less quite frequently. Those are Monk's main mechanics, and now we can get into its more juicy abilities. Monk has the ability Internal Release. This ability grants a whopping 30% chance to crit everything you cast. It is on a 60-second cooldown and lasts for 15 seconds and lines up with a significant amount of Monk's cooldowns, giving it a hefty burst every 60 seconds. You have the Riddle of Fire, a buff that gives a seriously powerful 30% damage increase with the caveat that it decreases your GCD by 15%. But who cares about that? Everything you press will hit like an exploding airplane. This lines up with Brotherhood, a respectable 5% physical damage buff that lasts for 15 seconds and affects all party members. The true genius to this skill is that every weapon skill used in the party, including the monks, has a 30% chance to open a chakra for the monk. With 5 chakra stacks, the monk unlocks the ability, the Forbidden Chakra, a 250 potency ability. The monk can charge this on its own, but it only activates under a 50% chance to activate after a crit from a GCD, or when you burn half a GCD to charge it manually. With Brotherhood, you can bypass all of that. With your chances greatly increased, you can spam your Forbidden Chakra. When you combine all of these incredible stacking buffs, and then add on the utility from the rest of the party, Monk becomes a sponge of building fury. Monk is incredibly receptive to damage buffs, and under its burst windows, achieves the highest damage bursts in the whole game. Monk's damage potential is absolutely horrifying, and because of this, the triple melee composition is actually one of the strongest, if not the strongest, compositions in the game. The only thing holding back the comp is that having 3 melee DPS plus 2 tanks can make mechanic positioning complicated, significantly weakening the comp for most fights. Monk is still an absolute monster of a DPS regardless, only beginning to do quite poorly in a party that lacks buffs and physical damage dealers. Monk does have some flaws worth mentioning. Monk has extremely strong burst AoE DPS provided all of its cooldowns are available, but once that burst window is up, not only is Monk's AoE DPS quite pathetic, but its TP cost is extremely high, and Monk tends to tucker out in longer AoE situations. It generally requires perfect balance to get the most out of its AoE too, but that only has such a long window that it can utilize. Monk also has a rotation that doesn't respond very well to downtime. Misalignments in cooldowns can severely throw the monk off of its game and push back its damage. Monk has many positionals, and while positionals are not hard to do, there are times when the fight dictates that you will miss positionals no matter what. With the recent True North buff, and the buff to Monk's missed positionals, this is less of an issue. But it is still something Monk is very susceptible to compared to the other melee DPS. Monk's Tornado Kick rotation is very powerful, but since it isn't always a clear-cut rotation and varies from fight to fight, it is hard to judge how you should handle it and can lead to high damage losses if not done properly. The rotation is a struggle for much of the community to learn, and while at the highest play it doesn't matter much, it is something to consider. Monk pretty much is toe-to-toe with Summoner and easily shares a spot with it. Its high burst, high damage playstyle with its lighter utility makes it a force to be reckoned with, and while it's not always wanted, it is strongly competitive and is an A-tier job. Thank you for watching the video. I really appreciate everyone for watching. If you have any points you want to make, please comment down below. I enjoy chatting about this game. Don't forget to like the video, and if you really enjoyed it, please subscribe.